Herzlich willkommen zu unserer heutigen Sendung aus dem Energiestudio in Berlin. Wir wollen Ihnen heute den aktuellen Gas Market Report der Internationalen Energieagentur vorstellen. Mein Name ist Charlie Grüneberg. Ich leite die Presse- und Öffentlichkeitsarbeit hier bei Zukunft Gas. Den Report werden uns die beiden IEA-Experten Gergely Molnar und hier bei uns zum ersten Mal Megumi Kotani vorstellen. Wir sind sehr gespannt, denn die beiden werden nicht nur das erste Halbjahr dieses Jahres betrachten, sondern auch einen Rückblick auf das vergangene Jahr werfen, das zweifelsohne ein historisches in der Gasbranche war. Die Veranstaltung wird wie gewohnt aufgezeichnet und im Nachgang auf unserem YouTube-Kanal veröffentlicht. Wir senden Ihnen die Präsentation der beiden, den Link zur Aufzeichnung und den Report später auch zu. Wenn Sie Fragen haben im weiteren Verlauf der Veranstaltung, worüber wir uns natürlich sehr freuen würden, dann nutzen Sie die Handhebefunktion oder schreiben die Fragen gerne in den Chat. And now I will switch to English, and I'm very happy to have you, Gergely, here with us. And for the first time is Megumi Kotani, your colleague, with you. Also a warm welcome to you, Megumi. Can you hear us?
Hi, nice to meet you, Charlie.
It's always very interesting to hear from you what has happened in the last weeks in the gas market. And this time the information is very up to date because the report of the second quarter of 2023 was published just yesterday. So Gergely and Megumi, the floor is yours.
Hello, good morning, and many thanks, Charlie, for your kind words of introduction. My name is Gergely Molnar. I'm a gas analyst at the International Energy Agency, and indeed it is a great pleasure to be back in the energy room of Zukunft Gas, and today is a particular pleasure to share this virtual stage with my colleague Megumi Kotani. As mentioned just yesterday, we released at the agency our quarterly gas report, which provides an overview of the 2022-23 heating season and the forecast for 2023. And for the very first time, it also includes a special spotlight on e-methane. And today's presentation will be very much structured along those lines. First, we will discuss the global gas market dynamics, and then we will have a closer look on what's going on in Europe. Last but not least, Megumi will bring us to the exotic waters of e-methane developments. So with that, let's us jump into the presentation. And, you know, this slide is just gives us a look back on the gas supply shock of 2022, when Russia more than halved its piped gas supplies to the European Union, putting an unprecedented pressure both on the European and the global gas markets. These steep gas supply cuts have, of course, reconfigured global LNG flows, drove up natural gas prices both in Europe and Asia to record levels, and also necessitated a painful readjustment in natural gas demand. But when we are looking at sort of the more recent market developments, we see that supply-demand tensions have eased quite significantly since the beginning of 2023, and this is also quite well reflected in price dynamics. On this chart, we are showing three key gas benchmarks: TTF for the Europe, Henry Hub for North America, and Asian spot LNG. And in all cases, we see that prices have fallen by approximately 70% from the mid-December highs. In Europe, TTF is now trading below $12 per MMBTU, and Asian spot energy prices have followed suit, and they are now trading well below $11 per MMBTU. You know, this compares with an average of $40 per MMBTU over 2022. And very importantly, what we see now is that the spot prices, both in Europe and Asia, have fallen back into the oil indexed price range, and even are at the lower end of this oil indexed price range, something we have seen the last time in the summer of 2021. And when we are looking at the United States, we see that Henry Hub prices have fallen from around $7 per MMBTU to $2 per MMBTU, which is quite also a drop. And this has been driven partly by the mild weather conditions in Q1 and also a very strong supply growth, production growth in the United States, which was up by around 7% year-on-year in the first quarter of 2023. And what is also quite important to note that the demand side played a very important role in easing the market fundamentals over the 22-23 heating season. On this chart, we are showing the demand changes across three key markets we are particularly closely following, namely OECD Europe, the United States, and the Big Four in Asia, which includes China, Japan, Korea, and India. And altogether, these markets account for approximately half of global gas consumption. And what we see is that in the 2022-23 heating season, demand across those markets have fallen by an estimated 5%. And as we can see on this chart, most of that decline has been driven by Europe due to a combination of factors, including mild weather, lower gas use in the industrial sector, as well as timely policy actions. We will discuss in more detail the European picture in the second half of this presentation. But I also would like to note that we have seen a significant demand reduction in Northeast Asia, including in Japan and Korea, where improving nuclear availability as well as lower electricity demand provided downward pressure on natural gas consumption. Meanwhile, demand in China remained broadly flat over the heating season. And when we are looking at the US market, our estimate is that demand over the heating season increased, but not significantly, by an estimated 0.6%. And most of that growth has been concentrated in the Q4 of 2022, while demand declined by an estimated 3% in Q1 2023 because of the quite mild weather conditions. Now, let's move to the supply picture of 2023. On this slide, we are showcasing the main vectors of global gas supply, which includes the piped imports into Europe, piped imports into China, both from Central Asia and Russia, as well as a global LNG supply. And I think that the key takeaway from this chart is that global gas supply is set to remain rather tight in 2023. Because when we are looking at the Russian piped gas deliveries to Europe, we expect that they will decline by over 35 BCM in 2023. Meanwhile, LNG supply is set to increase by just over 20 BCM, and as such, it is not going to offset the reduction in piped gas deliveries from Russia. So this sets a scene in which gas supply remains tight, and this will have, also implications on how we see demand evolving in 2023. But before moving to the demand side, let us have a closer look on LNG supply dynamics. On the first graph of this slide, we show the different components of how LNG will increase in 2023. We expect that global energy supply will rise by 4%, or just over 20 BCM in 2023, and more than half of that incremental supply will be coming from the United States, supported with the ramp up of Calcasieu Pass, and also the very welcomed ramp back of Freeport LNG, which is now running at nameplate capacity since the beginning of March, actually. So the United States will become this year the world's largest LNG supplier, ahead of Qatar and Australia. And of course, this is flexible LNG, which is coming from the United States, which is extremely valuable in the current market context. In addition to the United States, we expect that Africa and improving supply availability in Trinidad and Tobago will add approximately 10 BCM of LNG supply to the global market. This will be also supported by new projects such as Coral South FLNG or Congo FLNG. Now, in contrast, we expect that Russian LNG supplies will decline compared to 2022. The operator of the Sakhalin-2 LNG project recently announced that the plant will move away from the peak load strategy it has been pursuing in recent years, while in the case of the Yamal LNG, we expect that production will decline by 5% based on the statements made by the top management and the owners of Novatek. On the second graph of this slide, we are showing a bit the sort of drivers of incremental LNG supply in 2023. And I think that here what is quite notable is that improving feed gas supply availability will account for roughly 25%, 1/4 of additional LNG supply in 2023. Now, there is, of course, uncertainties related to the feed gas supply improvements, especially when we are considering recent developments in markets such as Nigeria or Egypt. So now we are moving sort of to the demand side of things. And when we are looking back to 2022, our latest data shows that global gas consumption have declined by 1.5% last year, which is a drop similar to the one we have seen in 2020, the year of COVID lockdowns. Considering the tight supply picture we just described, we also see limited scope for global gas demand growth in 2023, and we forecast that global gas demand will remain broadly flat this year. Most of the growth will be concentrated in the rapidly rising markets of the Asia Pacific and the Middle East, but most of that growth will be offset by the demand declines in the more mature markets of North America and Europe. When we are looking at the Asia Pacific, in our forecast, the region's gas demand will grow by 3%, mainly driven by China and India, while gas demand is set to decline in Japan and Korea amidst the improving nuclear availability in these countries. When we are looking at the Middle East, the region's gas demand is set to grow at a rate of 2% in 2023, largely driven by Iran and Saudi Arabia, and supported by expanding economic activity and the gas-intensive industries in these countries, as well as the continued replacement of oil and oil-fired products by natural gas in the power sector of those markets. In Africa, the growing population and the growing needs for electricity are driving demand growth, also in natural gas, and most of that demand growth is concentrated in the power sector in markets such as Egypt and Algeria. Eurasia is a bit tricky in a way, because the main moving part here is, of course, Russia. And in Russia, we see some case for growing gas burn in the power sector in light of lower nuclear power generation. But most of that growth is going to be offset by lower gas use in the industrial sectors, including energy industry own use. South and Central America, here the improving hydro availability in markets such as Brazil and Argentina is going to depress natural gas demand, particularly in the power sector. And then when it comes to North America, after a very strong growth year in 2022, we expect that the region's gas demand will decline by 2%, driven by lower gas use across all the sectors, including residential and commercial, power and industrial sectors. Last but not least, European gas demand is expected to decline by 5%, and we will discuss in a couple of minutes in more detail what is driving this continued drop in European gas consumption. But before moving to Europe, let us have a closer look to China, which is, of course, one of the key growth markets for natural gas in 2023. As we all know, China's natural gas demand declined by an estimated 1% in 2022, marking the first drop in natural gas demand in 4 decades in the case of China. And this decline has been really driven by a number of factors, including slower economic growth, some price-driven demand destruction, and also widespread lockdowns under China's strict zero COVID policy. Most of the demand reduction in China in 2022 has been concentrated in the power sector, where on one hand we have seen a record output in renewable power generation, but we have also seen a very strong comeback of coal-fired generation, and the effect of these two forces sort of squeezed out natural gas from the electricity mix. When we are looking ahead of 2023, our forecast is that China's gas demand will increase by over 6% this year, and most of that demand growth will be driven by the industrial gas use, which alone will account for over 3/4 of China's incremental gas demand. There is, of course, a lot of uncertainties around this outlook and around the outlook of China's economic performance in 2023. But what we can say is that preliminary market data indicates that in China, industrial gas demand increased by over 10%, both in February and March. So there is clearly some recovery happening. It is yet still early how strong this recovery will be. Our initial forecast is 6% growth, mainly concentrated in industry. Now, this rising gas demand in China will also have implications on China's LNG imports. In 2022, the country's LNG inflow declined by 20%, and this has been a key enabler of higher LNG deliveries also to the European market. Now, rising domestic demand and issues with Central Asian piped gas deliveries into China seems to already supporting a resurgence in China's LNG imports. When we are looking at recent market data, we see that China LNG import growth returned to double-digit, both in March and in April. In April, China's LNG imports increased by an estimated 18% year-on-year. And our forecast is that this year, China LNG imports will increase in a range between 10 to 15%, albeit remaining below the 2021 record levels. And with that, we would like now to move to the European market and to have a closer look what is going on here. So this slide gives us a bit of a summary of the dynamics over the 22-23 heating season. As mentioned earlier, Europe's gas demand dropped by a record 55 BCM over the 22-23 heating season. And this has been really driven by all the different demand sectors. When we are looking at the residential and commercial sectors, we see that there had been a drop of over 20 BCM, and this has been partly driven by milder weather conditions. But very importantly, weather explains only 40% of this demand decline in the space heating sectors. The rest can be explained by other factors, including the gas saving measures enacted in public and commercial buildings, fuel switching in rural households, improvements in terms of efficiency, some behavior changes, more installation of heat pumps, but also rising affordability issues. And I think that that's a very important component of the picture. In 2021, approximately 7% of the EU households were unable to heat up their homes to adequate levels. And the situation has probably worsened quite significantly over the previous heating season because of the very high price environment European consumers have been facing. So when we are moving to the power sector, here we see a decline of approximately 10%, and which translates roughly into 10 BCM. And this has been partly driven by lower electricity consumption in Europe, which dropped by 7%, as well as improving hydro availability. And last but not least, in the industrial sector, we have seen a reduction of over 20%, which was due to continued fuel switching, some production curtailments, and on the margin, some efficiency gains. Moving to the supply picture, I think it is very important to recognize that LNG has become effectively a new baseload for the European market. When we are looking at the 2022-23 heating season, LNG met approximately 1/3 of Europe demand and accounted for 2/3 of the region's imports. Now, this is a dramatic shift compared to the previous years, especially when we are considering that the share of Russian piped gas have fallen well below 10% during the 22-23 heating season. Maybe also worth to note the extremely important role played by the flexible LNG supplied from the United States. The US alone accounted for 45% of incremental LNG supplies into the European market during the 22-23 heating season. And today, the United States meet approximately 15% of Europe gas demand, which is quite substantial if we compare it with the recent past. Now, the combination of steep demand reduction on one hand and the continued strong LNG inflow into the European market kept European storage inventory levels well above their historic averages over the 22-23 heating season. And as we can see on this slide, the European storage sites stood 55% full at the end of the heating season, and the inventory levels were about 22 BCM above their 5-year average. And this is quite important also when we are considering the summer outlook, because this means that storage injections, half of the ones we had last year, would suffice to reach the European Union's 90% field level target by the 2023-24 heating season. Now, of course, lower injection demand can ease market fundamentals over the 2023 summer, which is again a welcomed news for the European and for the global gas market. And looking at sort of the short-term forecast for the European market, we see that it will decline, demand will decline by 5% in OECD Europe, and most of that will be driven by lower gas use in the power sector, where the strong expansion of renewables and on the margin some improvements in nuclear availability will weigh on gas burn in the power sector. Considering the dynamics in demand over the first quarter, we expect that gas demand in the residential and commercial sectors will decline by 4% in 2023. And when we are looking at industrial gas demand, we expect that it will recover by 5% this year. And most of that recovery will be concentrated in the second half of the year. Of course, this is very much linked to the evolving price environment. Now, this chart gives us a bit of an historic perspective, and it shows how the European Union's reliance on Russian piped gas evolved over the recent past. And it also tells us a quite important lesson about not ignoring red flags. Already back in 2004, when the European Union relied for approximately 30% on Russian gas, the IEA's chief economist, Dr. Fatih Birol, noted and called for a diversification of gas supplies. But as we can see on this chart, the European Union's reliance on Russian piped gas have increased over the last 2 decades, despite the transit cuts via Ukraine in 2006 and 2009, and despite the annexation of Crimea in 2014. In 2022, we see this sharp drop in the share of Russian gas in the European gas supply mix. And indeed, the share of Russian gas dropped to approximately 15% last year. For this year, we expect that the share of Russian piped gas will decline well below 10%. And we also see the other line, which represents the share of LNG, is that LNG is sort of taking the place in a way played in the past by Russian piped gas. For this year, we expect that the share of LNG will reach over 35% in the EU gas demand. But maybe also note on that after a strong increase in European LNG imports in the first quarter of 2023, we forecast that LNG inflow into the European Union and into Europe could decline in the remainder of the year because of the very high level of storage and because of the continued demand reduction. All in all, we expect that LNG inflow into the European Union and into Europe will remain broadly flat compared to 2022. Now, what does this mean, all of that, for the Russian upstream sector? So this chart shows us a bit the fluctuation of Russian gas production since the beginning of the 90s. Just to recap, last year Russian gas production have fallen by a record of 90 BCM. Most of that reduction has been absorbed by Gazprom, which saw its production declining by 100 BCM. Now, I think what is notable on this chart is that there is quite a bit of flexibility when it comes to the Russian upstream, and we have seen in the past quite big production swings in Russian gas output. But this time it is a bit of a particular situation because it is a multi-annual issue. And as we can see on this chart of history, after a steep drop in Russian gas production, there had been always a rebound the next year. This is not going to be the case this year because of muted demand in Russia and because of the continued decline in Russian exports into the European market. And the combination of these two factors leads to a forecast in which Russia's gas production will decline by an additional 50 BCM, which will put some pressure on the Russian gas industry and in the maintenance of the fields in Russia. Now, I think that when we are considering all the recent market developments, it gives us ground for cautious optimism ahead of the remainder of 2023. As we noted in the beginning of this presentation, gas prices across Asia and Europe declined by over 70% compared to their mid-December highs. The storage levels, again, both in Europe and Asia, are well above their historic averages. And I think that those developments are very positive, also from an energy supply security point of view. But there is no room for complacency because the global gas supply is rather tight, and there is a number of exogenous risks weighing on the global gas balance in 2023. And those risks, they can also renew market tensions. In this slide, we are picturing some of those, including adverse weather effects, such as a cold Q4 or a dry summer. More limited availability of LNG, which can be due to unplanned outages, or a stronger than expected recovery in China's LNG import requirements. And there is also the continued risk around the profile of Russian piped gas deliveries to the European Union, considering the ongoing invasion of Russia of Ukraine. So all of that tells us that there is no room for relaxing, and there is a continued need to keep demand in check, especially in the European market. And there is a continued need for structurally reduce natural gas consumption via an accelerated deployment of renewables, of heat pumps, but also via enhanced energy efficiency measures and continued behavioral changes. But part of that picture of reducing our reliance on natural gas is the scale up of low emission gases. And when we are saying low emission gases, we mean the scale up of biomethane, low-emission hydrogen, but also we should consider the prospects of synthetic methane or e-methane. And now I would like to give the floor to my colleague, Megumi, who will present on the most recent developments in the e-methane space. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Gergely. I will continue with the spotlight on e-methane. I would also like to thank Zukunft Gas for organizing this event, and thank you for all the participants for joining us today. In the following section, I'll be presenting the highlights on e-methane from the quarterly gas market report. I will first describe the taxonomy, the costs, and the modes of production, as well as the challenges and opportunities which lie for this particular market. Then I will share some examples of e-methane projects in Japan. To begin, e-methane refers to synthetic methane produced from electrolytic hydrogen. While natural gas could certainly be decarbonized with CCS, e-methane only refers to methane production based on renewable hydrogen. E-methane is produced through a two-step process. Low-emission electricity is first converted into hydrogen by electrolysis, and the resulting hydrogen is then reacted with a carbon source, in the middle shown in the diagram. There are currently two main methanation technologies available for demonstration, categorized as either catalytic or biological. Catalytic methanation involves reactions performed under high pressure and temperature conditions ranging from 200 and 700 degrees and 1 to 100 bar. The technology readiness is at pre-commercial demonstration of a prototype with system efficiency of around 80%. The biological methanation is performed by microorganisms at comparatively low pressure and temperatures of around 30 to 70% degrees. This technology is not yet commercially available and is expected to have a lower efficiency of 50 to 60% in comparison to catalytic methanation. In terms of levelized cost production, IEA estimates that the current e-methane production costs are in the range of $50 to $200 per million British thermal units, which could be 70 to 160% higher than low-emission hydrogen costs, currently in the range to $3 to $9 per kilogram of hydrogen. Both CapEx and OpEx are very high. CapEx is around $1,000 per kilowatt, which could decline to around $500 per kilowatt, so half of that by 2050. In the APS scenario, the total cost of production could decline to a range of $25 to $110 per kilowatt by 2030. While costs are high today, e-methane offers strategic advantages for certain jurisdictions. Being interchangeable with natural gas, e-methane can be used in existing gas infrastructure, including storage tanks and end-use applications without the need for repurposing, which could lead to significant cost savings. For instance, the typical foam insulation used for LNG pipelines are unsuitable for liquid hydrogen, as you well know, which instead require vacuum insulation, hiking pipeline costs by 5 to 10 times per unit of length. In addition, storage options are wider. E-methane can be stored in salt caverns and porous formations, and the costs of constructing a new LNG storage tank is 2/3 of that of a hydrogen of a comparable volume, which allows for greater flexibility in meeting seasonal and short-term energy demand swings. Adopting e-methane would also link hydrogen networks by enabling the conversion of hydrogen to e-methane, which may be useful for several sectors where natural gas is already widely adopted. Next, I would like to provide a regional focus on the context of e-methane deployment in Japan. The government of Japan considers methanation as a key component of its strategy to decarbonize its gas supply. The country's 6th Strategic Energy Plan set a target for synthetic methane to comprise 1% of the gas supply in existing networks by 2030, increasing to 90% by 2050. Japan aims to reduce e-methane costs to 120 yen per normal cubic meter, an equivalent of about $25 per million British thermal units by 2030, and down to further 50 yen per normal cubic meter, or about $10 per million British thermal units by 2050. The country's strategic energy plan aims to ramp up natural e-methane supply to 0.28 million tons by 2030 and 25 million tons by 2050. This amount excludes direct hydrogen, biogas, and other direct uses of non-fossil fuels. To achieve this target, the government administers funds dedicated to e-methane. As for the research and development, it's administered by the New Energy and Industrial Technology Development Organization, in short NEDO, and provides R&D funding under the Green Innovation Fund. In 2017, the government launched a 5-year program worth $14 million to demonstrate the viability of methanation technologies. The new Green Transformation Program is set to provide another major funding boost. Several Japanese enterprises have embarked on e-methane production projects. In 2024, INPEX and Osaka Gas will lead the largest domestic project in Nagoya, which is near Mount Fuji, with plans to produce 60,000 cubic meters per hydrogen in commercial phase. Most recently, JFE Steel Corporation and IHI Corporation are developing the world's largest methanation system. The plant will be able to produce 500 cubic meters per ton of per hour of e-methane by using 24 tons per carbon dioxide per day from exhaust gas derived from a test blast furnace. Operations are scheduled to begin in 2024. In addition to domestic demonstration projects, Japanese utilities and trading houses have started to jointly explore the feasibility of developing e-methane supply chains with LNG exporting countries. While no binding agreements have been reached yet, these recent project proposals could potentially enable 0.4 million tons per year of e-methane imports to Japan by 2030. This would equate to around 0.6% of Japan's natural gas consumption in 2022. In conclusion, for major natural gas importers like Japan, e-methane is selected as means to decarbonize the gas supply. The costs of low-emission electricity and hydrogen will be key to enhance its cost competitiveness. Further research is needed to commercialize these technologies and increase their efficiency. Nonetheless, there are major cost-saving opportunities from being able to use the existing natural gas pipelines, LNG terminals, and storage tanks without the need for retrofitting. For further information on the quarterly gas market report, including all the projects internationally and domestically, the report is available online. Please find more about the report and other IEA's publication on our website, iea.org. Again, thank you for joining our presentation today. Now I would like to give the floor back to Charlie.
I already received a few questions. Please feel free to post further questions. Let us stay at the subject of biomethane and e-methane. There's one question. Can biomethane contribute to increase gas supply and decrease gas prices in Europe?
Well, maybe we can reflect on that question. I think that when it comes to biomethane, there have been adopted some ambitious targets, ramping up its production to 35 BCM by 2030. And in that respect, yes, biomethane can reduce the reliance of the European market on fossil gas imports. Now, I think it is also important to note that at the moment, Europe's biomethane production stands at 4 BCM. So we have less than 8 years to increase biomethane production by more than sevenfold. There is obviously a need and a requirement for a more holistic approach in terms of subsidy schemes, regulation, and also policy support in order to achieve those ambitious targets of 35 BCM by 2030. In terms of prices, when we are looking at the cost of production of biomethane, it has been below the very high gas prices we have seen in 2022, but you know, I think that broadly speaking, the biomethane production costs would be still you know, in the range of 70 to 100 euro per megawatt hours, and as such, you know, that's significantly higher than, for instance, the gas prices as they stand today. So there is a need for further deployment, and there is a need for reducing further the costs related to biomethane production.
Mm-hmm. And let's have once again have a view to Japan and the e-methane strategy. There's a question for you, Megumi, I think. Why e-methane instead of hydrogen in the Japanese city gas consumption? What is the reason for this decision?
There are some committees discussing the viability of both. And as for now, all the technologies are not at commercial stage yet, so we can't really know for sure which e-methane or hydrogen is more cost competitive in the long run. However, given the advantages of being able to use the existing gas infrastructure, this is a huge benefit to consider, especially for Japan, which have been relying on natural gas for a long period of time. This is why our final energy mix for our strategic plan includes e-methane, but it can vary for the context of is quite different country to country basis. So because Japan adopted this strategy might not work for another country.
Mm-hmm. There's another question about this subject. Given the lower efficiency of e-methane versus a hydrogen-based energy supply at large, do we have sufficient renewable energy potentials, and who will pay for the extensive further build-out of the required capacities?
I can only talk from a Japanese point of view. We are only blessed with fish, and we don't have any natural resources at all. So this is why we are looking into building international supply chains to bring hydrogen back to Japan. And then some projects does not rely on imported hydrogen. E-methane can also have can be you know, water and carbon dioxide can just be converted to the hydrogen at the location without the need for imports, so to say. But so I think for Japan, we will be relying on renewable energy from abroad. So maybe Europe can also consider importing renewables from neighboring countries, or which, depending on the location, and it might be a good choice and for when we talk about costs.
Okay. We stay at the point of hydrogen, but we are moving from Japan back to Europe. Do you see there a higher hydrogen demand in Europe, and which countries are the countries who will increase their hydrogen demand?
Thank you, Charlie. Maybe because I'm also looking a bit at the question. So the question I'm seeing, it is more related to hydro. So it might be like hydropower and not hydrogen. But yeah. I mean, we can try to answer both. So I think, like, you know, the question related to hydropower output. So last year has been a terrible year for hydro generation in the European Union. There have been droughts, and for this year we expect some recovery compared to the very poor year of 2022. And actually, when we are looking at the electricity mix of the 22-23 heating season, we have seen some improvements in hydro availability. There is obviously a risk around that because droughts have been announced in a number of countries, including France. We are closely monitoring this. That's, as we noted in the presentation, that's actually one of the downside risks for this year outlook. And, you know, when it comes to a different topic, to hydrogen production, we clearly see that the Northwest European region is the sort of front runner in terms of the development of hydrogen developments in Europe. And as such, we have a dedicated report to this topic, which we publish annually, the Northwest European Hydrogen Monitor, where we provide an in-depth review on the policies, the subsidy schemes, infrastructure development, and supply, demand, and trade picture. In generally speaking, what we see is that there is a very ambitious pipeline of projects and very ambitious targets set in the hydrogen strategies and roadmaps of the countries. But when we are looking at the actual developments on the ground, you know, how many projects have reached final investment decision, how many projects started construction phases, there is a huge gap between those developments and the ambitions set. Now, again, this being said, we really think that the most of the hydrogen developments in the medium term will be concentrated in the Northwest European region for several reasons, including the considerable renewable potential in these countries, the very well-developed and well-integrated gas infrastructure, and also the political will in those countries. So these three components are quite a strong driving force for hydrogen developments.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And as you can see, the questions, you maybe already have seen the question about the price forecast for LNG in Europe, short, mid, and long term. And when I'm right, you're not giving price forecasts, but maybe you can give us some view about you mentioned there are several factors, the wide range of risks. Maybe you could give us a slight insight. What are the highest potential risks in this wide range of risks?
Yeah, no, thank you, Charlie. And indeed, we don't provide price forecasts, but I think what we can say is that we have seen a movement towards a gradual rebalancing of the markets, but markets are not rebalanced yet. So when we are, cheering up that gas prices in Europe are now at around $12 per MMBTU, yes, they are significantly higher, with the average $40 per MMBTU in 2022, but they are still significantly higher than the historic prices we have had in Europe, which averaged at $5 to $6 per MMBTU between 2016 and 2020. So, and we need to add to this that the supply picture for 2023 is really tight. So, we cannot afford a major outage at some LNG production plant. A further reduction of Russian pipe gas supplies could put into a difficult situation some of the European countries. And also we need to have a bit of luck in terms of weather conditions, like, a dry summer combined with a cold winter can put pressure on the markets and could easily renew the volatility. I think because the question also refers to the medium term, I think it is important to note that in terms of LNG capacity additions, 2023 and 2024 are quite dry years. There is only a limited number of new LNG projects coming online, and we will start to see a change in this situation in the second half of the decade. In 26, 27, when there will be huge projects commissioned in the United States and Qatar. And once this new LNG liquefaction capacity is brought online, we will see probably a more balanced and eased market. But this is more in the second half of this decade.
Thank you. Here in Germany, we have a quite intense discussion if we are building now too much LNG import capacity. What is, from your international point of view, your impression, what's happening in Germany at the moment? So
I think we noted during the presentation that for this year, we actually we think that LNG imports into Europe will remain broadly flat compared to 2022. Now, this being said, an LNG import infrastructure is built not only to supply as a base load, but there is also a need to build some capacity which serves as a buffer in order to meet seasonal variability in gas demand and also to respond to unexpected situations. And in this respect, there is a need for additional import infrastructure in the case of Germany, which has relied for over half of its imports on Russian pipe gas. And today, Germany does not receive any molecule directly from Russia. So that's a very, very important shift. And of course, the infrastructure setup was not necessarily fit for that pattern. So there is a need for incremental infrastructure, but it is also very important to make this infrastructure flexible, either via FSRUs, which can be then diverted to other markets once they are not needed in Germany, or via a design of LNG import terminals which can shift to low emission gases services, such as, for instance, ammonia service. And I think that one of the recent capacity contract, which has been concluded in Germany, actually offers this option of shifting at some point to ammonia service from LNG service, which I do find personally quite interesting commercial offer.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And did I understand you right that Russian LNG is declining, or you think that it will decline this year? Because I thought that Russia will strengthen its LNG capacities because it's not delivering so much gas via pipeline anymore.
Yes. So indeed, when we are looking at sort of the global Russian LNG production for 2023, in our forecast, it will decline because, again, the operation of Sakhalin LNG 2 is moving from a peak load strategy to operating at more nameplate-like rates. And also Sakhalin will undergo a heavy maintenance this summer, starting from July. And this maintenance will be carried out without foreign service providers for the first time. So let's see how this plays out. And in the case of Novatek or the Yamal LNG plant, the top management of Novatek noted that the plant will deliver 5% less LNG than in 2022. So globally speaking, there is some downside risks around Russian LNG supply for 2023. It doesn't necessarily mean that this is a long-term trend. I think that Russia has a very ambitious LNG strategy, actually, to ramp up its production of LNG to 100 million tons per year by 2030. Again, this is something to be yet to see, because we see that there are some difficulties ramping up this production without having access to Western technologies. So that's something to be seen.
Okay, and one last question now, really to hydrogen and not to hydropower. What kind of instruments do we need to establish liquid hydrogen markets as quickly as possible? I think Megumi already began to answer that question.
Yes, I think we received a few questions about hydrogen, and one of them was from Jacob. And one of the few ways to effectively develop the market is to leverage LNG cryogenic technologies and building supply chains with government funding. Most R&D projects are funded by governments, so it's important to also bring in public funding and as well as private funding, and ask for international banks to possibly support nascent technology projects in general. These are some of the ways that Japan and other countries have been developing the hydrogen and e-methane projects. There aren't so many, so it is it will be a novel program, but it's very effective so far. It has to be backed up with policies as well. So governments, like Gergely said earlier, have to have a strong political will to develop the markets.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Gergely, and thank you, Megumi, for these fruitful insights in the international gas market, and especially for the Japanese side of e-methane, what was very interesting from our European point of view. We are looking forward for the next report in 3 months. And yeah, well, thank you very much for today. Vielen Dank auch an Sie, liebe Zuschauerinnen und Zuschauer, für Ihr Interesse und Ihre Fragen und Ihre Teilnahme an unserem heutigen Webinar. Die Präsentation sowie den Report werden wir Ihnen im Nachgang zu dieser Veranstaltung zusenden. Und dann bleibt mir nur, Ihnen einen erfolgreichen Tag und schon mal ein schönes und erholsames Wochenende zu wünschen. Bis zum nächsten Mal und bleiben Sie gesund.